Speaking. I'm sitting at the Monroe County Historical Association on February 3rd, 2022, and I'm sitting here with Suzanne Fretz McCool, and Amy, the executive director, is also in the room with us, and she may ask some questions too. So Suzanne, why don't you tell us about where and when you were born and who your parents were, maybe set the stage, your family kind of thing.
Okay, I was lived in Mount Pocono, but born at what was the General Hospital of Monroe County in 1944 on December 25th. I was their big Christmas surprise. My mother had been a nurse for Dr. Hay at the Pocono Haven, but she trained in Philadelphia at the General Hospital School of Nursing, and she was lucky to go to nursing school because she came from a large family up in Daleville. They had many children and not much money, but the family doctor wanted to send her to nursing school because she was a bright young lady. So she was the oldest of 7 girls in that family. My father was in business, but he was from the Philadelphia area, and he was one of 11 siblings. But my mother was his second wife. So his first wife lived in Wyalusing, and they had been in hotel business, and when they divorced, she stayed with the hotel. Years later, when I student taught in Wyalusing, and Mary Fretz was very good to me, and my mother was always friendly with her too. So they had a good relationship. My father was 26 years older than my mother.
Okay.
So it was more like he was the age of a grandfather than a father. But it really didn't matter when we were young. They had the airport in, but my father went in with 2 of his siblings, my Aunt May and my Aunt Ida, who had been running the airport in for several years, probably from the late 30s, and then into maybe up till 1950 or so when we had to leave it. So my mother probably met my father socially. She had been a head operating nurse at Philadelphia General Hospital, but she came back to her family roots. And then from then on, she worked with Dr. Hay, the famous diet doctor at Pocono Haven. And my sisters and I think that they met socially, either at the Airport Inn, which was a great gathering place for young single people, or across the street from Pocono Haven. I think there was some kind of little bar or restaurant.
Airport Inn, I'm sorry, I don't know where that, what?
Oh, today it's called Bailey's Restaurant.
Okay.
And it is one of the last standing original structures in Mount Pocono. There were many, many big hotels that were wood frame in the old days, but a lot of them have since burned down. But Bailey's is still there. And when my father and his 2 sisters had it, it was called the Steakhouse of the Poconos. Now, my father was also a cattle dealer, and he dealt mainly in beef, but I understand horses too, because I learned in later years that he did a lot of business with the Amish people from Lancaster County, but he was for Bucks County and Montgomery, his relatives, and so business took him down there. But he ended up with his 2 sisters. However, they both passed away at some point, and I didn't meet them because I was born after my older sister. And so my father had the hotel by himself then, and then my mother came in with him. They married, and everybody in my mother's family was a fabulous cook. So she took over the chef work, but my father was a great cook too. And they ran the hotel. They also had the Pocono Mountain Dog Show, and it was an American Kennel Club show. And but I was like a toddler, so I remember those dogs in cages and being put out and shown. And we also had the Mount Pocono Horse Show. And I have information here, written information, to show you some of the programs from like 1942 through 1947. But the original horse shows were not in the back of our hotel, but the later years they were. So I think I remember the grandstands being built, but I do remember the horses, and I remember people braiding their tails and everything at the horse shows. And it was, pretty interesting stuff. But being 2 years younger than my older sister, she remembers a lot more of that. But my father was really involved in the community, and Bill Leonard was helpful because he found the information for me on when the Mount Pocono Airport Association was formed. And I have the date somewhere over there, but I think it was 45. And Leroy Dengler, who owned the Hawthorne Inn, was the chair of that board. And these business people from Mount Pocono, of which my father was one, were able to lease the airport from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for like $1 a year. So apparently the state didn't want to bother with small airports. So that's sort of an interesting thing. My father was really trained to be an opera singer. His family had him study. Now, my older sister said that he went to the Curtis Institute. I went there, but no one was in the research department the day I was there, because we were in Philly for a wedding. But I know my mother said he had a private vocal teacher named Sir Frederick Peake or something like that. I put some of these things in my memoirs because I have written a book which I published in 2016 after I finished my career in the county. So anyway, going back to the music, my father always led the singing at the Rotary meetings. He was very involved in Rotary there, and then later at our hotel in Laceyville. And we all sang, my sisters and I. He would gather us around the piano. My mother played also because she was taught by a nun in Mount Pocono. After she was a nurse, she finally had some money in her hands, and she was able to take piano lessons. And she used to walk from Pocono Haven to Pocono Summit to take her piano lessons. So I don't know, I always thought it was pretty nifty that my mother and father had a lot in common, and music being one of the things. And my mother never went back to nursing because of the hotel business. And, she was just so good at it. And they were just friendly, gregarious people. Like, people loved going to our hotel and bar. And, many of the politicians stopped there. And, the horseshoe is part of the circuit that was in Devon and Madison Square Garden. And one of the horseshoe balls I know was at the Hotel Casey in Scranton. So people from New York and Scranton area advertised in the programs for the horse shows. So in later years I started, reading through these things, and I thought, wow, that is, really cool.
Do you know when they ended?
Oh, they end. The last program we have is in 1947, but there might have been another one. But I know we left there, if I was born in 44, and we had to leave that hotel and we bought a home in Paradise Township. So I'm thinking, who knows, maybe 49 or
Did you
something.
live next to in the hotel, near the hotel?
We lived in the hotel, at one end of the hallway, but it, was like 3 stories. So, yeah, we just lived in part of the hotel.
And you mentioned one sister. How many other siblings?
Oh, I have a younger sister, Paulette.
So
So she was, the baby. And when we moved to Paradise Township, we were there just long enough to close on the deal for the hotel in Laceyville, which was called Hotel Angler. So Linda was in 2nd grade, I was in 1st, and Paulette wasn't in school yet. So we weren't there very long. I think by October we had moved to Laceyville, and there we lived in the hotel too. And the people up there loved hunting and fishing. So that was like, a big thing during those seasons. Other than that, the Rotary meetings were at the hotel, and people driving through the endless mountains. The only problem was my father was promised the liquor license for the hotel, and he was never given it, and he could only sell beer and soda. So right there was a losing proposition. And, I didn't know any of this because I was just traumatized starting in a new school, and it was a tiny school, 2 grades in it, called Skinner's Eddy. And the first day there, and I think this is why I became a school teacher, I just cried, and Mrs. Robinson just put me on her lap and hugged me and kept me with her all day. And I'll never forget that. And I really finally adjusted to life in Laceyville and really got to love Laceyville. And the next teacher, Miss LaFrance in 2nd grade, she lived not far from the school. So where our hotel was, my girlfriend Donna Setzer and I could walk to her house. She lived with her mother, and we would pick her flowers, and she never acted like we were a bother. It's just, I've always liked small towns. I think that's probably why I've always stayed in Stroudsburg. And my sisters all live up in the woods, They like to look at the birds and animals, but I have birds too. So, Laceyville was really great, but what happened was my father's health took a turn that was not so good. It was gallbladder disease. And everything happened at once. He couldn't handle the business. And apparently we lost the hotel, and everything we owned was sheriff sold.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was so beautiful and Victorian. However, friends of ours bought back a lot of our furniture from the sheriff's sale. And I have pieces of it still today because it has sentimental value for me. And in the book I wrote, my memoirs, I have pages of some of these antiques. And I have the piano from my parents, but they bought that when they were at the Airport Inn. And they carried it to Laceyville, and Linda and I both had piano lessons when we were young. So we were very privileged until everything went south.
How old were you when everything went south? Were you in 2nd grade at that point?
Well, let's see. We had to leave there when I was in 3rd grade. So I was probably 7 and a half, and then I landed in the Paradise Township school. And then that was another big adjustment. And my father had his surgery at the Monroe County General Hospital, but something went wrong. Now, they gave him this is gross, a bottle with his gallstone in it, and it was like that big, and he had it on the fireplace mantle, and he would show it to people. And Mrs. Manchester was a visiting nurse. It turned out her son and I were in the same grade. I never knew what a visiting nurse was, but she came and changed my father's dressings and everything. But he came home with a drain in him, and so on and so forth, which was not good. And he didn't recover completely. He had episodes, and he had to stop his business because he made a trip out to South Dakota every year. He was still in the cattle business, and he would still buy cattle for farmers. But they had to take him off the train in Chicago one year because he didn't know that it was a gallbladder attack. So after the surgery, that was the end of that business. And my mother worked all the time, and people knew they were in hotel business, so she worked for different hotels in the area. So for the last 8 years of his life, and he died in 1958, Paulette was 11, I was 13, and Linda was 15. And we had good years. My father was home, and he grew a big garden, and we always had fresh fruits and vegetables. We had cherry trees and gooseberries and strawberries and blackberries and everything where we grew up. It was a very pretty area of Paradise Township. And he sang in the church choir. So most of the time he was okay, and my sisters and I were all in the choir with him. And we, our life revolved around that. The thing is, in his later years, he started filling up with, liquid, fluid, and he had to keep going to the hospital and getting it tapped out, and that could not last forever. So they sent him to the Graduate Hospital in Philadelphia to correct the problem. And he actually had a wonderful surgeon, in fact, the same surgeon who had done surgery on President Eisenhower. Not that I can remember his name anymore. But they said the operation was a success, but they did a new procedure where they lowered his body temperature, and that was supposed to help with the surgery. The only thing is his kidneys stopped functioning, and so he passed away. So my father had so many relatives from Philadelphia, so his one nephew, Stuart, who owned a big funeral home in Ambler, took care of all the arrangements and, brought him from Philly, and the viewing was at our house in Paradise Township. And that was pretty unnerving, trying to sleep at night when, your dead father is in the living room. So I don't know, I was sort of traumatized by all of it. And, so I was really quiet in high school. They said I was very, very shy. But with all the moving around and losing the business and everything, it was hard years. So
how did you survive? Your mom worked?
My mom worked, but her younger sister, thank God, my Aunt Audrey, was always there for us. She never married, and she was the last one at home after her mother, my grandmother, died, the one from Daleville. And my parents brought Audrey to the hotel, and my mother was pregnant with me, and she said to Audrey, this baby is going to be yours. You're going to take care of her. And that brought her out of her depression, but she had had a terrible diet, never ate right, was very overweight, and Dr. Kahn of Mount Pocono diagnosed her with juvenile onset diabetes. And I think she was like maybe 12 or 13. I always thought she was much older. And so my crib was in her room at the hotel. And she just, she learned hotel work, she learned to cook. She was a sociable person, and she became a very happy person. And she really was there for my mother when my father passed away, because we had some really tough years financially. And I remember in one of my early years of teaching at Pocono Township School, one of the teachers was saying, "Oh, these people getting their food stamps and this and that and the other thing." And I just put my fork down and I said, "Let me tell you about that. Some kids have parents that die, and my father died when I was 13. And if my mother hadn't gotten help from the government, we would have starved. Who knows where we would have, ended up." So I guess I was starting to get my voice about politics because I wasn't too shy anymore. But anyway, as we got to be teenagers, we all had jobs. We worked all the time. In fact, my mother started working for Margaret and Julia's staff that owned Paradise Inn. In fact, my father, when he was still alive, he used to go over and carve the meats on Sundays, because they did roast beef and turkey and ham, and he was, hotel business. So when he was able, he used to help. So anyway, we all got jobs. At 11, I started watching Helen and Bill Deetz's kids, babysitting them. Linda did the year before, but then they made her salad girl. And then, another year I was like the pot washer and, the dessert and salad girl. And then when I was 15, I was allowed to go in the dining room. I don't know if you're allowed before you're 16, but I did become a waitress at 15, and Linda was already a waitress. And by then, Paulette was doing the babysitting of their grandkids. So we worked there for many years in the summers, but they were only a summer resort. So the rest of the year, my mother did have to go on welfare. And also, she never drove. Until my father died, she had to learn to drive the car. And Brenda Kaufman down the street helped her learn, like in the driveway. And then my cousin Shirley Kuiper Mack from Toby Hanna was the one that taught her and got her out on the road. And she was so proud when she bought her first car, which was a used car from Mix Motors in Mountain Home, and it was a big old Dodge Dart. In those days they had the big wings. But she was so proud of getting her driver's license.
So you went to high school and you're starting to get your voice, you're starting to...
Yeah, and it was the election of President Kennedy where I really got my voice.
How so?
Because we had to debate in our English class, and Mr. Roan was our English teacher, and he at Paradise Township School, and he was a scary guy. But anyway, I don't know who I was debating against, but my little legs were shaking. They were probably knocking against each other. But apparently I did a really great job in the debate and got an A. So I got to go to Mansfield to teach because my Aunt Audrey scraped the money together for my first semester.
For college?
Yeah, for college.
I want to hear this, but I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Where were you when Kennedy was assassinated?
I was coming out of teaching music to the elementary students in the music building of Mansfield. I just went out the door, and other students ran up to me and said, Susie, the president's been shot." I said, What are you talking about? And everybody went over to North Hall and crowded into the Mansfieldian room. See, I didn't watch TV in college because there weren't any, except like that one in North Hall. And we were all crowded in the room, watching everything. And I loved him because I campaigned, and when I got to college, we had to read 2 books before we went to college: Making of the President, 1960, And then we had to read The Agony and the Ecstasy, The Life of Michelangelo. And my high school teacher said, try something different. You've been in band and chorus and library council and the basketball team. Try some new things. So I joined Young Democrats. I joined Intercollegiate Conference on Government and the International Relations Club. They were some of mine. I was also in a couple music things because, I like that. But we went to Harrisburg and we had to write bills and argue them in the assembly. They gave us the whole Capitol, college kids from all over the state of Pennsylvania.
So you're in college, right?
Yeah. So, the thing with President Kennedy really affected me, but the thing is, when Lyndon Johnson came in, I was president of Young Democrats that year, and I got an invitation to the inaugural ball. And I thought, oh, this is bogus, it can't be so. So I took it to my professors, who were, the ones that were our club advisors, and they said, this is real, and if you can go, you should go, because it's something you'll never forget. And I thought, well, I went. My mom didn't know what to do. She said, oh, that's really nice, but I don't know how to get you there, Susie. But my Aunt Audrey engineered it. By that time, she was the head chef at the St. Alphonsus Retreat House. So she got one of the guys that made deliveries to the retreat house, Leo, a guy from Dunmore, and he regularly stopped at convents to make deliveries of trinkets and things they would sell. He gave me the ride to Washington, D.C., and my sister Paulette was in college down there then at Strayer College of Business, so I stayed with her in her dorm. Meanwhile, I was able to get a date. Another boy in the club at Mansfield had an aunt who was a committee woman, and so got tickets to the ball. So we arranged to meet in front of the Mayflower Hotel and go into the ball together. And it was so exciting. I should backtrack. I didn't have a gown. Susie Frucci of Toby Hanna lent me this most beautiful gold gown that she maybe wore for a wedding. And then my Aunt Audrey bought me these beautiful pearls and pearl drop earrings and the white gloves and the whole thing. So I was all set for the ball. And Hubert Humphrey came to that ball. He was up on the balcony of the Mayflower and surrounded by Secret Service, and they kept looking because they're just trained to observe anything that might be unusual going on. So I didn't get to shake his hand. However, Count Basie's orchestra played, and when I went to the ladies' room, Mrs. Basie was in there, and she had this gorgeous gown on, and we just said hello, but it was crowded. A lot of women were in there, but she didn't know it, but I touched her satin gown because I thought I'll never have this experience again. So it was, a really great time.
Did you get to meet LBJ?
No. Because they don't go to every ball.
Oh.
And they don't let you know what time they're going to be at which ball, because security had to start getting heightened after Kennedy was assassinated. Right. However, I faithfully did whatever I could do. Because of him, we did get the Civil Rights Bill passed earlier than we would have. Some people feel that too many deals would be made and Kennedy would never get it through, but LBJ did. But the thing that brought him down was the Vietnam War.
So what were you studying at Mansfield? Elementary ed?
Finally, but I didn't know what subject to pick because I loved everything in school. I liked every subject. However, one of my favorite teachers at Barrett was Mrs. Louise Johnson, and she was the home ec teacher. So because I liked her so much, I started majoring in home ec. I didn't realize how much I hated cooking and sewing until I was in home ec. In fact, the first segment was sewing, and we had to make a blouse and a skirt. And I mean, you know, I had done skirts, you know, in high school, and the apron, everybody had to do an apron. Blouses are a little trickier. And I was having quite a time. I was spending extra hours in the sewing lab and could never get it right. So at Mansfield in North Hall, we had the bathrooms were a long line of, you know, the cubbies. So I was in there one day, and I heard two girls talking, and the one said, "You'll never guess. Susie Fretz is paying me to put the sleeves in her blouse." I put them in backwards, and the seam was on the outside, and I thought, oh no, I can't let her know I'm here. She'll be embarrassed. So I stayed in there. And the thing is, I finally realized home ec was not going to be for me. So I finally talked to my advisor and switched credits over and went into elementary ed. And the thing is, I hung around with a lot of the history and social studies majors because we were all in intercollegiate conference on government, young Democrats, young Republicans. We were all friends. It didn't matter which political club we were in. So I always liked history. And because of that, it's so funny, I was an elementary major, but our advisors of the political clubs decided I should go with a group to Swarthmore College for a big conference called America, the New Europe, and the Atlantic Alliance. So all the other kids were social studies, history majors, but I got to go as a little elementary major. And they put us up with people in the neighborhood, and then, you know, we'd be back on the campus of the college for our meals and everything. It was a thrilling experience, and the biggest wigs of diplomats and people were there. Not the most famous ones, but some of the very well-known news reporters. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was like they took kids very seriously. So that was, you know, so I really got involved in, I didn't always stay in politics because when I got married and raised kids, I had, you know, too much to do, and teaching full time and working on my master's degree in counseling. So, and the Democratic Club was meeting in a bar, and I thought, I'm not going to any bar for a political meeting. I was used to conference rooms at the college, you know, and arenas, and, you know, at Harrisburg. So I just didn't. And it wasn't until Sonia Getz took over the local club because Stu Pfeiffer passed away, and I went to the viewing, and she knew who I was little, and she said, "You have to come in this club. You got to help me out. You got to help me out. You know, I've got all the responsibility now." And I said, "Well, I'll do whatever you want." And I just became a member, and then pretty, you know.
But this is later, right?
Later years as an adult.
What year did you graduate from college? Would it have been around 67?
66.
66.
Yeah. And
then you came back to the Poconos?
Well, I took my first job outside of Philly in Marple Newtown District in Broome, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And it was a 6th grade class. And it was a dream job. I didn't realize how dreamy, because they hired people to watch the playground, to watch the lunchroom, to do everything for you. And I thought all schools were like that until I came back the following year and found out you do it all yourself up here. But I came back because of the social life. It's really hard to meet people in a big city, you know. And coming back here, there was a whole lot going on, like, you know, the discotheque scene and all of that. So a lot of my girlfriends, we would always meet up here in the Poconos. and go to the charcoal hearth or up to Walker's.
So how many years were you down there at Broome?
1 year.
Just one, and then you came back up here.
Yes.
I want to ask you something about the charcoal hearth, but you're on a roll. Let's hear the rest of you. So you come back up here and you get a job immediately?
Oh yeah, it was, easier to get jobs then. I guess there was a teacher shortage maybe, but I wanted to go back to Pocono Mountain, and I had to take a job in Stroudsburg, which was good because I made a lot of really great friends here in Stroudsburg. But I was starting my master's degree at Scranton U, and I really couldn't afford to stay in an apartment. I had 3 other, roommates, 3 other girlfriends, and I had to live at home, with my mom, and she was so happy to have me because she, was a widow, and that was much easier to drive to Scranton from there. But then I moved in my aunt's apartment at the retreat house, and that made the trip into Scranton only, 20 miles instead of 30 something.
Mm-hmm.
And so it took me about 3 years to get my master's degree in counselor education.
While you're teaching elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
And then when did you meet your...
Oh, how I met Terry.
Yeah.
It's so funny. It must have been the year I came back from Philly. I took a typing class. Joan Paulus was the teacher of the night school at Pocono Mountain.
Oh yeah.
And because I never learned to type, because it was either in high school taking creative writing or typing, and I thought the writing would be more important. I think it has been in my life because I write a lot. And so I thought, I'm going to learn to type the right way. So I took the class, a bunch of women in it, but 2 men. Terry was one of them. By the second week, he had changed his seat and sat right across from me. And he kept saying dumb things like, my typewriter can't spell, can yours? And he was learning typing because he was a newly commissioned second lieutenant in the Pennsylvania Army National Guard. And they had to type a lot of reports. So that's why we were in that class. And then before you know it, he invited me out, and then, out to the Amber Club for a glass of wine and to get to know each other. Then, a couple weeks later, he asked me to be his date at Pocono Manor for a ceremonial mess. I had no idea what that was, but it was a very formal affair of the National Guard and all these men in their beautiful blue uniforms. And the speaker of that conference was from Honesdale, a well-known general. And is there one named Leimnitzer or something? I don't know, something like that. But anyway, it was a famous general. But I got to know his National Guard friends, and their wives were their fiancés. And so that's how we got involved, and maybe a year and a half later we were engaged. And those friends have stayed our friends all through life. In fact, right now, one of his Army buddies is visiting him in Florida because he's there and I'm up here. And I went to school, not with that, I knew that kid, but his older brother was in my class because I'm a couple years older than Terry. So yeah, we're still friends with all of our Army friends. And it's just been a really great life.
All right, so the question I wanted to ask you about the hearth, charcoal hearth. Did you go there a lot? Big crowds?
Well, Bob Weiner and the
gonna
Devils
ask.
and the Devil Dance.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. He'd be a good person to interview, Bob Weiner.
Yeah, and he's a photographer at the college today, and he did the jazz festivals all the time. So, there was a really good social life here in the Poconos.
All right, so you're teaching and you meet Terry and you eventually get married. And are you a teacher? I don't know, 20 years, 30 years, or do you?
Oh, I retired after 34 years. However, after 6 years of teaching, I became a school counselor, and my first job was at Easton Junior High, but I wanted to counsel high school kids. So I only stayed at Easton for 1 year, and then I took a job in New Jersey at North Warren Regional. And I stayed there for the next 5 years, and the last 2 years I became their director of guidance. But there was a lot of turmoil in the school, you know, between union and non-union, and I just didn't want to deal with all that stuff. I just wanted to help kids. So a job opened at Warren Hills Regional, and you know, they fired the superintendent I liked at North Warren. So I went over to Warren Hills, and at that point, Jake Pyatt was the superintendent of that district. And he didn't really know me, but he knew I was from the Poconos, and he liked what he heard in the interview, so I got hired, and I stayed there for the last 22 years. So 5 years at North Warren and then 22 there, and whatever added up to 34 years. I took an early retirement, and I continued working, but I worked with children on the autism spectrum. I had a lot of credits beyond my master's degree, and I had a certification as director of pupil personnel services, and a lot of credits. So I got hired by one of the provider agencies, and for a year I worked with children that had autism, and it was a wonderful job. It wasn't easy, but it was good. But I decided I wanted to work with all kinds of kids, so I went with a different provider agency and worked with children who had other issues, like oppositional defiant disorder. And that was so rewarding, because when I got over to North Cortland, the school there in East Stroudsburg, they had assigned me a little boy. He was hiding under a desk and wouldn't come out, and he was learning disabled, plus the oppositional disorder, and one other issue which I can't think of, but I know he had 3 various problems. And when I took a look at the curriculum they had him in, I said, this boy is not placed correctly. You know, he has got to be in a class where he gets one-on-one instruction. Not basically one-on-one, but a different type. He couldn't do the regular curriculum. And so they moved him, and this wonderful teacher, I mean, she just, you know, did a phenomenal job, and he started coming out of his shell. As a mobile therapist, you take them everywhere. And he had an unfortunate home situation, and the mother was not a good mother, and but she was allowed to have him so many hours a week, and the dad had, you know, his own issues. But he had a girlfriend who was pretty sharp and took that family in hand. And so in the years I worked with him, he just became a polite little boy, and I'd take him out to eat, like to the diner for lunch, and people would say, oh, is that your grandson? Oh, he's so well behaved. And they never knew what a rough diamond he had been. Okay. And I got invited to the parents' wedding. It was at the Moose Lodge outside in the back, and you know, there was little David in a suit and tie and a flower in his lapel, and just looking fabulous. So I loved working with that population of kids, and I did it up until the time I ran for commissioner.
Well, you had started the story of how you got back into politics when that woman asked you, and Piper died.
Yes, Stu Piper died, and he had been, you know, for years, the chair. And usually in those days, men were always the chairs of all political organizations. You know, women could be worker bees, but, you know, we didn't do much. I was really into the women's lib, though.
What year roughly? I mean, I know we could look this up, but do you remember what year roughly he died? This is happening. He died, and you were starting to get involved in politics.
Oh, well, let's see. I think it had to be in the 80s.
Okay.
Yeah, because the first time I ran for office wasn't the first time. I ran for town council in the 80s and lost every time. But I was on the planning commission. I'm still on it for over 40 years. So I did win commissioner in 2003. A lot of people don't know my husband ran for commissioner, who knows, 6 or 7 years before that. And I helped campaign for him, but you know, we didn't spend any money and he didn't win. So anyway, so 2003, and then I took office in 2004 for commissioner and stayed until 2015.
Now, why does somebody decide to run for commissioner? I mean, what was motivating you to do that?
Oh, because Jim could do, I do. In fact, when I visited my Aunt Audrey at the retreat house, I used to go to Sunday school at the Methodist Church in Tobyhanna, and so did Jimmy Cadu. And he had a little bow tie his parents had him wear every Sunday. So I knew Jimmy, he was younger than me, for many years, and I talked to him quite a bit. And oh yeah, I campaigned for Joe Batista because of the college experience and the politics. Well, when I was a freshman, we tried to get self-government on the campus, and we had a big demonstration. We want self-government, and the president of the college didn't want to hear about it. So that was my first foray. So those people came, you know, and yanked me into Young Democrats. So so I knew Jimmy, and then when Joe Batista, he had been my English teacher. He's the one that taught me creative writing in English. And I love him to this day because he was so great as a teacher. And he really worked on us developing our vocabulary and everything. Just an aside, in college I wrote an essay for Western Lit, and the teacher kept me after. She didn't believe that I wrote it. She said, "I've never had a freshman use words like this." She made me define each word that she didn't think I should know, and it was all because of Joe Batista. So I went door to door in Stroudsburg for Joe, and I just told people he was my English teacher. He was an honest, ethical man, and he was in quite some time before things happened and people lose elections. Yeah. So then, you know, I kept my hand in a little bit, but I'll tell you, not today. The country's very divided, and I, you know, became disenchanted with the last administration. So, I mean, I certainly had my Biden signs up, but I can't watch it at night. I mean, I don't have the energy. I have 3 or 4 health problems going on. That's why I wanted to do the interview, so I'd have a legacy here in case I pop off sooner than I want. And I just can't watch it. To think we could lose our voting rights, that they're being rolled back. Women's issues are being rolled. Everything I fought for in the 60s, and believe me, I was on marches against the Vietnam War and for women's rights, and you know, I wrote a 10-page bill on civil rights for the conference and got 8 pages passed at one of our political conventions in Harrisburg. And I'm glad to see young people are stepping up because I don't have the energy now. I mean, I have the desire, but I can't do it. And it really saddens me. But I've had a great life. My husband had a great military career, and he's learned to be a good retiree. I'm learning. See, I took, well, I probably could have won another election, but I thought 3 terms, 12 years is enough for anyone, and I did not want to be in my 70s and still running for office. It's a lot of wear and tear. So, so I'm doing other things. So the first thing I did was to write the book of my memoirs. And then that was when I finished. I was very active in the County Commissioners Association too. So I sent them a copy, because a couple other commissioners across the state have written books, and they always advertise them in their professional magazine and stuff. So that I did, and well, my first book was actually while I was still in education at Warren Hills, because in 1994 I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and I didn't know if I had a future. And we had a teacher who was a phenomenal, he's well known today, Ed Ramon, great teacher and poet, and he has done readings like everywhere, like in New York City and Philly and locally, on the East Coast. And he got all the teachers writing for a literary magazine. So I put all my poems together over the years and made an anthology, because I didn't know if I had a future at that time. I went through 6 months of chemo, after the surgery, but I'm still around. And then in 1918, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And because of that, medical science has moved along, and they can test for genes now that hadn't been isolated before. And it was discovered that my sisters agreed to be tested too, because I had the 2 cancers, and the doctors were worried that they might, especially since so many of my father's sisters died of cancer. And it's a gene called ATM, but the name is that long and I can't pronounce it, but that's what they call it, the ATM. And so here I am again. I couldn't handle the chemo this time. I did all the radiation, but the chemotherapy threw one of my other conditions into a flurry, and I said, I'm not doing any more chemo. Whatever happens, happens. So that's why I wrote another book on our son Mark, who was taken to Desert Storm very early when he was in the Air Force. And it's really amazing today, what medical science has done. And but my sons, one of them agreed to be tested, and he doesn't carry the gene, and that means his 3 little girls are okay for that. But my other son, he's a different kind of guy. He lives in Arizona, and he's just an interesting way of looking at things. And he has 2 daughters, and I said, don't you think you should get tested so that my 2 oldest granddaughters know whether they have to be concerned or not? And he said, no, they'll have the usual screenings that all people get. I don't agree with that philosophy, but I can't change it.
Yeah.
So, so none of us knows if we're going to be here tomorrow.
No.
So I write books and articles, and
Well, you've probably covered a lot of this stuff in your book, but I was wondering about your career as a council person.
oh, you mean being on commissioner? Okay, because
Commissioner.
council's
Yeah,
different.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what are the things that, what are the big events that you were involved in, or the big doings in Monroe County?
Well, they think everything has to do with the budget, which ultimately it does. However, the important thing is to use the money wisely. I don't want to say I fought. It makes it sound like it wasn't nice discussions. But there were times they were going to cut the VOCA Act and some of the women's rights issues and women's health issues. And I was always strongly opposed to that. I was also very unhappy, and I'm not going to name any names, when I found out they were not the commissioners, this would be over in the courthouse. We're not applying for grants that would have helped people in this county. And it just meant taking time to fill out the paperwork and not being upset if somebody from Harrisburg monitors it and looks it over. There was a lot of money we lost that could have gone for human service needs. And I was always on the Human Services Committee of CCAP because, well, they knew my background in counseling and teaching and, you know, all that kind of thing. And so they put me on that committee, and I stayed on that for 12 years. So, and I used to, you know, give talks here and there, and I used to always quote Hubert Humphrey, who said, "The moral test of government is how that government treats those in the dawn of life, the children, the twilight of life, the elderly, and those who fall in the shadows of life, the poor, the needy, the handicapped." And I always made that my mantra. And people would say, "Oh, you're just a politician." And I would say, "No, I'm not. I am a public servant. I am here to serve the public." The problem is with people that get into offices and serve themselves. And, you know, that's what I see happening today. There are so many people leaving the assembly, state and nationally. And I know it's because they can't take it anymore. And I mean, good people on both sides of the aisle that were doing good things. And it's gotten so nasty. It was never that nasty. We knew how to debate and have rip-roaring debates, you know, in the caucus room if we were in the Capitol or at college. But we could shake hands and respect each other at the end of it. I don't know if that's true today. I'm very concerned.
Well, you've lived a pretty interesting life. You've done a lot of things.
I have.
Yeah.
And I've always had a lot of energy, you know, up until now. But, you know, there's so many interesting things going on. I still read a lot. I watch a lot of PBS, you know, thank God for television. And I still ski. I was a ski instructor for 32 years. So.
Oh, at Campbell?
Nope. Timber Hill, and it became Alpine Mountain.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Forgot about that place.
Yeah, and now I ski at Shawnee, but I haven't been there yet because I wanted to get this over with, and it had to be over 35 degrees to get me out of the house. So, but you ski for free when you're over 70 at Shawnee.
I just learned that, actually.
Did you?
I skied for the first time on Monday.
Good for you. Well, maybe I'll see you over there.
So, of all the things you've done, what are the things, or the thing that you're most proud of? Besides your family, obviously.
Well, yeah, I mean, the first thing you say is your family, because I couldn't believe, you know, when I had my first child, a little human being, and then I said to myself, well, I have to grow up, because we had a really good time in the 60s at the charcoal horn. So, yeah, the things I'm, like in college, it definitely was my training ground. Dr. Harper was one of the social studies teachers of a class you had to take, and one of the advisors of the club. He was so motivating. And I think that's why I just got so active, you know, in politics on the campus, and then, you know, arguing bills for people in the state of Pennsylvania. So I think I'm really proud of everything I did. And then, oh yes, all the debates when I was at North Warren. I had joined a consciousness raising group, and it was women from Pike County and us from Monroe County, and we were allowed to hold our meetings in a church basement of St. Matthew's, God bless them. And that was a wonderful time, consciousness raising. But some people felt I was like a little too radical. So we would get in, to these discussions in the faculty room or at lunch. But you know what? It was good discussions. They were, and no one got offended or anything. They just say, "Do you really believe this stuff? Do you really?" Certainly. I mean, look how long it took women to get the right to vote, for goodness sakes. And oh yeah, like we couldn't even have credit in our own name. Years ago, it had to be your husband's name. So I went to Penny's one time to open a charge, and finally I had money when I was a teacher, because we were poor for so many years before we went to college, and they weren't going to give me a credit card. And I said, "What do you mean you're not going to give me a credit card? I'm a teacher. I have a salary. I can pay this bill." So I don't know what happened, but I got a card in my own name. But I couldn't believe that women, they didn't even realize, a lot of them, that they thought that's the way it's supposed to be. But you had to make those changes, so I'm proud of that.
When you were a teacher, did any women have to quit when they got pregnant? Those kinds of things? You hear those stories every now and again.
I think that happened before I was even teaching.
Okay.
I remember some cases from other schools, but I just, in the few schools I was in, it just didn't happen, because I was here in the Poconos, and the schools were small then, not like they are today, mega structures. But that would have been, one of the things that would have happened in those days.
I see you have some notes here. Is there anything in here we didn't cover that you, any questions I should have asked you that we haven't gotten to yet?
Oh, I don't know. Because you covered a lot of these notes.
I don't think you ever said your parents' names, though.
Oh, right. John Paul Fretz and Viola Teresa Grabowski Fretz. So her father, my grandfather, Albert Grabowski, came to this country when he was about 11 years old. I was told he came over on the boat, like there was one boat. But the Prussian wars were going on, and his family wanted to get him out of Germany, because so many other young people were fighting in wars at that age, and they had already lost some children, so they sent him to this country. I don't know how he ended up in the Daleville area, but he married a woman whose last name was Bonitz, Bonitz, and that was a German name too. But her family, she was like second generation, the woman he married, and that was Teresa Bonitz, who became a Grabowski. So yeah, and then everybody in Mount Pocono, when they married, called him John and Vi Fretz. So she went by Vi instead of Viola.
Do you have any other questions?
No, I think that's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was
Wonderful.
fascinating,
Very,
Suzanne.
really.
I'll give you one last chance. Do you have anything else you want to?
Oh, well, I talked about my mother working for Dr. Hay, and he was a really famous diet doctor, and I have an article published on that, because he cured himself of Bright's disease. And that was a disease that really wasn't curable. They used to do bloodletting and things like that. And people like Alexander the Great and Napoleon and people like that had that disease. So it's all in my article, but I can't, name all the names of people that we know that had it. But yeah, so that was interesting what she told us, because she went on Hay system, which had something to do with the acids and the alkalides in foods, and it had to do with food combining. They were allowed no alcohol, but they had to drink, I don't know if it was vegetarian or not, but I know she had to drink carrot juice and tomato juice and this and that. So she got to go, for being from a poor little farm family, and she got sent to nursing school. She had an interesting life after that, because he had a clinic in Florida, in St. Petersburg. And she and other nurses got to go down there in the winter one year. and she always told us she got to swim on Christmas Day. But she came back because then she married my father, and I don't know when the clinic ended, but it became High Point Inn. And it's funny, years later, I got hired there as a waitress at High Point Inn. And it used to be Pocono Haven. So I have pictures of these. If anybody wants to read the memoirs, I'm not having any more copies printed, but all the libraries have a copy, the Historical Association has a copy. And the postcards that we made photos of were lent to me by Alice Mackla of Mount Pocono and Mary Ellen Flood. So Mary Ellen was married to John Flood, whose father started the Last Resort bar and restaurant in Paradise Township, which has since burned down. But there's a whole article on that in the Pocono Living magazine.
Oh, okay.
So I write a lot about the area, and I just did the, because it's so historic, the Willow Tree Inn, that there's been a structure there for 200 years. So, I try to keep my hand in. The flood of 55 is another memorable thing, but that would take a whole hour to talk about. And I do have an article on that, and I revamped that article a year ago. And I think it was published by Paradise Township Historical Association. I belong to quite a few historical associations. And I just encourage everyone to learn the history of the area you live in. And even if you don't want to join, go to a meeting or something and hear what people have to say. They're fascinating, what you learn from older people.
That's a great note to end on.
Okay.
Right?
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Well, it wasn't as bad.